Okay, everybody, we're gonna try something a little different here today. Since there haven't been any sprint zones in a while, and a lot of folks don't get a lot of camera time, and I haven't had a chance to like ramble on for a while, we're gonna try a ride along ride, and this is a portion of the Tuesday ride where I'm gonna just talk about what I see here. So Matthew, Michaels, and I, we just got off the front on this one, and it's time to come to the rear and see how things are organized. It's it's a reasonably tight group, and I'm gonna be maybe a little pedantic here. I prefer a tighter 2x2 pace line, but it is what it is, and this is reasonable. And I've noticed that like there are some riders that just don't like to ride next to other riders, or maybe I just haven't noticed that, or people that are just comfortable half wheeling, etc. But as far as most group rides go, this is like okay. So a quick look in the rear, we see how cars pass us. They give us enough respect. In the back here, we have some guys just coasting with strongmen. Eric and Matthew back there. Now, I wonder about this section of road because we always go two up and it's kind of narrow. And we see that a lot of people are forced, or maybe not forced, to ride over the white line. And I want to look at this as a perspective from like a car. Now, I'm certain the cars are probably thinking, gee, they've got plenty of shoulder here. Why are they riding in the road? And to some extent, it's a valid perception on their part. But as long as we are keeping it tight and legally we are allowed to ride like into the road like a foot or whatever, and they have to pass. But from a courtesy and the appearance of entitlement that a lot of cyclists seem to have, we really don't want to present that. So, but here you can see there's a lot of people riding right next to the white line, which is legal. I find that a little bit alarming for myself. I don't like riding next to the white line if there's any room to get over, because some of these cars like to make a point and they'll pass you within the 3 feet boundary, either because they don't know or because they're trying to scare us off the road. That being said, it's a nice stop, and here we take the lane and take the road so that cars don't try to pass us or whatever. So there are some riders up the road that made it through the gap, and here we are, closing the gap at a reasonable pace. So my take is here, and I see this on a lot of group rides, they try to close that gap too quickly to sprint up to the people up the road. This, I don't know. Well, I'll just say it. I don't like it. Because if you're sprinting up to catch people who should have been waiting, it no longer becomes like a group ride. And there are some people that get caught back that are really strong. So they throw out 6, 7, 800 watts, and you're left chasing. But in this case, most of the riders in this group understand the group dynamic, and we close the gap at a reasonable pace. And I'm going to digress a little bit. I was on one of the other group's rides the other week, and people got advantage in a situation just like that. There was a stop sign, they made a left turn, and never looked back. They just took that as if this was some sort of competitive ride. I mean, people, if you're going on a group ride, it should be a group ride. If you're going on a group ride to drop people, then there are things that they call races, and I'll talk to you about this, where you pay money, they give you a number, and there's a bunch of like-minded people that want to do the same thing. But maybe a little more on that later, because I'll need to digress. It's one of my pet peeves. So here we go. Once again, the group has reformed, and because this group has an expectation, they don't take advantage of the gap there. Everyone is well mannered. It's unfortunate because we had to do an alternate route that we don't really have a sprint zone on this particular ride. And it is the sprint zone which I feel allows people to get all of this competitiveness just out of their system and to see what they have. If you don't do this, there's always riders with much higher FTPs that need or feel that they have the need to go to the front, and they figure because everybody else is sitting in that it's okay, and then you end up with a fragmented ride where eventually it can become a hammerfest. But let's talk about what we're doing here. Now this is pretty sweet here. It's a nice 2x2 for the most part. People are tight. It's a nice bunch. They're not all over the road. Um, Colorado law does allow us to ride two abreast, so this is perfectly fine. We just don't want to abuse this by riding too far out in the lane. But on some of these country roads, there's plenty of clearance, and on this particular ride, we didn't have any issues from cars. Now, occasionally you get some of these people with their trucks and their modified exhaust systems where they want to make a statement because clearly they don't understand the laws, or it makes them feel good because they think they're going to dissuade us from cycling, or they're just being bullies. And that's maybe really what it is. They're being bullies. They're in their big trucks and they try to bully us. Now notice how nice that guy was that just passed us. He had respect. He knows the law. He sees there's plenty of room to go by. No need for craziness. A well thought out driver who's smart. But this ride looks pretty well, and this is pretty much a typical Tuesday ride as far as like pacing, and very similar to the Friday ride. In fact, this is one of the older Friday ride routes that I have conscripted due to the fact that several of the roads, in fact the main road Prospect where the normal sprint occurs, has been closed, and much to my chagrin, we have to have an alternative. At this point, I haven't given much thought to like a new sprint zone, but it looks like that road is going to be closed for quite a while, so I may have to come up with something or some kind of new format. So anyway, very nice singling by the group. It's nice and tight. Everybody knows where they're going. And this is one of the reasons why I like to pick a route that is somewhat familiar. There are some ride leaders that either don't post the ride the night before or feel that they need to make long speeches where people zone out. And I'm going to admit it, somebody gives a really long speech, 5 minutes, about what the road is or the route is, and I don't understand where these roads are. As soon as I hear a road that I'm not familiar with, the rest of that speech was just wasted. Well, anyway, that being said, so here we are, kind of all over the road. There's plenty of shoulder. Um, Lots of power being thrown down at the front for a while where we felt the need to catch up. Looking at the speeds here, like 26 miles an hour, that's pretty good. People starting to tighten it up. It's a good thing that there are no cars behind us at this point because this would be an issue. But there are some people that just, and there's plenty of shoulder here, and you can see in front of me, there are very few riders that have chosen to ride actually in the shoulder. In my opinion, this is a problem because it's this entitlement, or we've normalized riding in the middle of the road. Now, on this particular section, it's somewhat understandable because the shoulder is going to disappear, and you really need to hold a line and not quickly have to, get into the street because that can surprise people. So if you've already held the line, in that respect, that's a good thing. So on this section of road, I'm good with this. Plus, there's really no cars behind us. So it's a pretty well-formed group. We have abandoned the 2x2 because there are strong men at the front pushing the pace. And you can see, like me right here, over 300 watts, just to kind of stay in contention. And the 2x2 goes out the window when people are looking for the best shelter. There's a nice friendly car passing. They know the law. You're allowed to pass. Double yellow, bicycles, especially when you've got a clear view, because bikes at 20 miles an hour, it shouldn't take you that long to pass. So Carlos over here has let a little bit of a gap open up, and I think at this point I said something to him about that, and then he closes the gap. This happens on lots of rides, and at least it's not in the middle, and at least he didn't close that gap rapidly. I don't know if on this ride there's any examples, but there's a few riders, and I'm not going to call them out in this ride, that they will open up a gap because for whatever reason, and then they will sprint to close it. And those are the riders that I do not like to be behind. Is it good training? Yes. Is it a waste of matches? Yes. Because on most of these rides, there is always a time to go. And there's a little violation there. I don't know why the rider in the black there had to go across the yellow line to get into the group. Um, I don't see that as being the right thing to do. It was not necessary. And this is the example of entitlement. You know, there are certain rules that we try to adhere to on the rides, and one of them is if you don't have to cross that yellow line, don't do it. And most of the time, you really don't have to cross that yellow line. I can only think of a couple examples where maybe somebody crashes in front of you, maybe there's debris in the road or some sort of construction. Those are the only times where, I might find it necessary to cross that yellow line. But that instance there, coming across the intersection, that wasn't necessary. And I'm guessing there's probably not a lot of people that are going to watch this video. But that's okay. And, or at least not the whole thing. And for people who want to see what a typical Colorado ride is like, or at least the Tuesday ride, they'll get a chance to look at the actual telemetry that I've provided up there in the corner, see what kind of wattage is actually necessary, and see how well mannered the group is. And of course, the color of the group always changes depending on who shows up. And it's almost like playing chess. You play chess and there's certain pieces that are off the board, or you're playing an opponent. You know what that opponent's skill level is. You know what he's likely to do. You know how predictable that particular environment's going to be, and as such, that's the way it is here on the Tuesday ride, where different people will color the rides, especially strongmen. I mean, the weak riders, well, and I'll say the wheel suckers, and I use that term affectionately, they don't really color the ride so much, except for if you get caught behind them and they are too weak to hold the wheel in front of them. Many of them don't understand the etiquette of, or even the survival skill of, as soon as you lose that wheel, or you know you're losing that wheel, or you think you can't hold the wheel, you need to move over and let some other people come through. If there's a long line behind you, you can sag back and get some respite. And if it's big enough, you can get a better draft back there and be able to save yourself. In this case, you can see people are struggling a bit. I didn't call out the wattage. You can look at that yourself. But there was some wattage being thrown out on that little bridge. A lot of group rides, they try to hold the same speed on the bridge versus like power. If you hold the same power, you slow down. On a long climb, you typically would slow down because you're not going to be able to do that extra wattage for, a quarter mile or a mile. But in this case, these little punchy climbs, people like to punch it, and you really need to be aware here. And you need to not be behind riders that are not going to contribute or are going to cause you to burn a few extra matches having to go around them. Because then when it's go time, or it's time for you to contribute, you're not going to be able to. So we know this particular piece of the road isn't well traveled, and so there's no issue like taking the lane here. Everybody stops, which is the courtesy thing to do, even though there is a new Colorado law that says we're allowed to go if we can. The riders up front they understand they needed to stop here. And this is one of these examples of when you can get advantage. And there was someone asked a question here whether we're going to go left or right. It was pretty obvious that we're going to go left. We always go left. If we would have went right, that was going away from town. But whatever. So here we are, starting to get organized again. And this is where there's a lot of people that like to kind of open up gaps or kind of sag behind because they don't want to be at the sharp end of the line. They just want the shelter. And it's like one of these things, it's not comical, but you could just see that They can easily be up a little further, but they're just not. So that's not one of my issues. I think it's safer to be at the front, even though I burn a few more matches. The sometimes yo-yo effect or the questionable skill set way back, or just having more riders in front of you. The more riders in front of you, the more chances there are for a crash to occur. So for every rider that's in front, that's an extra shot of somebody doing something like incorrect. At this point, I believe there's a little bit of a headwind, and people are working hard, as this is going to be one of the few sections where you can kind of string it out. And the format on some of the Friday rides is, on the way out, you stay together, and on the way back, you can maybe do a little bit of what you want to do, weapons free, so to speak. But on the Tuesday ride, we like to try to stay together, mostly. But this is a chance for people to string it out a little bit and get a little exercise. Looking behind, you can see what everybody looks like, and maybe if some of the riders that were actually on this ride recognize themselves, they may see some habits that maybe are good or maybe are not good, and a chance for them to correct themselves. Because this is the view that a car might have or other riders might have, and if you are selfish and don't realize that you are doing things only for your own gain and not for the benefit of the group, it'll be evident here in some of the footage. I believe at this point it was Matthew Michaels at the front and driving hard too. Maybe it wasn't. Nope, it was somebody else driving hard, and maybe Matthew Michaels had pulled off, but it was somebody driving the pace up there. And even though it doesn't look like it's that fast into the headwind, it's a little bit of work. And I must say that the group actually looks well mannered here. I mean, the speeds are good. Nobody's making any rapid moves. There comes Greg giving the signal to everybody that we're going to keep going. There was a call to maybe add an extra 4 miles to the ride, and I was like, I don't have time for that today. So we noticed we didn't stop here. That's the new Colorado law. You can slow down below 15. If there's nobody coming, you can go, which is actually a safety feature. I know a lot of motorists are not going to like that. They're going to see entitlement there because they're looking at things only from their perspective. They need to try to have some empathy for other people, and that's something that very few people, riders, cyclists, anybody actually have. And once you gain empathy, you'll notice how your behaviors or lack of behavior actually affects people. In this instance, the pace has actually hotted up a bit, and you see 26 miles an hour. At this moment there, over 500 watts, because I believe maybe it is now that Matthew Michaels had gone to the front. And you can see that little bit of a gap opening like behind me. The correct thing would have been it to pull off and let other people come through instead of trying to struggle, in a futile manner and sag back. If others would have recognized that, they could have gone around, but having to go around somebody, that's just extra matches being burned. So even though there wasn't a sprint zone here, this looks like a selection, which I am happily tacked onto at the back. Everybody is in a nice line. No one is struggling, and all the riders up here I would consider to be strong men. There's another rider up the road, and the signal was given that we need to move over a little bit. Slight wind coming out of the southeast, I believe. So there's a little bit of shelter to the right shoulder of people if they recognize that. And sometimes it's better to put a little extra effort into the wind. And as we come up on the rider, I think I heard the sound of a flat here, and you can see the rider here pulling off. Seasoned racers know to raise their hand high. You raise your hand on the side that you have a flat, left front wheel, right rear wheel. A lot of people don't know that. It's kind of unfortunate, but if people don't know to do that, or people don't know to recognize that signal, it's kind of futile. But I just point that out here, as that's what pretty much racers do. And if you're like a World Tour team, you raise your left or right hand, and then the car knows which wheel to get ready. At this point, I had dropped back a little bit. Typically, we wait for flats, but because of how this ride unfolded, people were just, the message didn't get passed, so we didn't stop. But I know that particular rider is like seasoned, as are most people, and really didn't need any assistance. It was the other week a rider had a double flat without the correct tools. It was a good thing that we stopped for that rider because there could have been some well, need for a car. In any case, I digress. So the Grupo is altogether -1, and this is a slight downhill section. Even though for some reason it only shows 0% grade, I'm not quite certain. Oh, there we go. The telemetry is a little bit late. Either it's the way I synced it or not, but anyhow, it always is a nice ramp to throw out some serious power. And as you can see here, like 27 miles an hour, I got 300-400 watts, trying to stay with people. And at this point, I was reasonably comfortable, and I felt reasonably good that the folks up front were safe enough. There are some railroad tracks up here, so I don't particularly like to throw down all of the matches in this section. There are some riders that hit those tracks and just hit it hard. I see that as a kind of a cheeky little sneaky way to make people work harder. I prefer to coast and float these, as most riders do, and it's a chance to avoid some of that. But you see, even that little gap that happened with me right there, if the riders up front continue to go on, and you can see there's a little bit of a gap here. Yep, see the rider who is properly pulled off to the right there, unable to hold the wheel. But notice that if you sag back, see this little trick here? And he was able to maintain contact. And that's the same thing that can happen. And if you recognize that you can't hold the wheel, do that. And not only will you have more people in front of you for a better draft, you get 2 or 3 seconds to try to recover. And that's really a big deal. And if you've never experienced it or never tried it, it's a good tactic to help you maintain contact in a ride. So at this portion, we're actually heading towards a red light. I don't really like to hit it too hard down here because for me, hitting it hard and having to stop, there's just something about spooling up the warp drive and then having to shut it down that is kind of distasteful. I am somewhat of a punchy rider, being more fast twitch, and it's my inclination to like to do, or have the physical ability to do these things. I just don't really like to. I really prefer to save the matches for when there's an extended, stretch, and that's when metal is in fact tested. This, of course, is one of the few stoplights. Because of the new laws, we can come through, hit the red light, hit the green light there. Everyone's in tow, controlling lanes so we don't get cars trying to pass us when they don't need to. So up front, there were some folks that were throwing down a little bit of wattage. It's like one of those things that if you are up front and you're the first people to take off, there's that accordion effect. And if everyone closes their little gap slowly, that accordion effect is not too dramatic. But a lot of riders, it's like, oh, gotta get on that wheel, gotta get on that wheel. Especially the second and third people, if they had a gap, and then by the time it gets back to the last person, they gotta throw 600-700 watts down to close some gap. And it's just, not group efficient, especially if you want those riders to at some point come to the front and participate. But I digress with more of my lecturing. The group looks pretty good here. There's not a lot of shoulder, but we're controlling the lane. This is somewhat of a major highway, and as you can see, most people are riding in a nice formation. And of course, away from, the main traffic. The bike lane kind of disappears here, and then we get a little more shoulder up front. Still see some riders riding much closer to the white line than I think is necessary. From a car's point of view, I just don't like that. When there's this much shoulder, and all the riders up here are strong, there's really, in my opinion, a better way to ride is in the shoulder more. That being said, there's a lot of debris in the shoulder. And sometimes it doesn't get pointed out, or if it does get pointed out, and this is one of my pet peeves, riders will point out something and then ride a millimeter away from it. And because of where they ride, you can't see it. You have no idea what they're pointing at. In this case, not so horrible, but if it's a big object, and in this case, there was shouting going on because there was lots of debris and logs. But sometimes some riders, they point it out, don't say anything. We're thinking about safety here. It's if you see something that's um, a major hazard, see something, say something. But for the most part, we're safe. And like I said before, it's like a chess game. If you know how a group behaves, if you know the characteristics of the riders in front of you, who's a good rider, who looks up the road for debris, who's the person that points out stuff at the last moment. The last ride I did, like there was some debris, and the rider in front of me made this super quick move to the left, actually in front of me. And he made some quip about overlapping wheels. My wheel was not overlapped, but I was kind of surprised how quickly he just snapped over in front of me. If in fact I was accelerating, that wouldn't have been good. So this is County Road 5, which is typically a sprint zone of some sort. In this ride, I didn't call any official sprint zones, but because of its familiarity, people take it to be as such. And it behooves folks to be up near the front. There's some folks leaving gaps open, but Matthew threw down a lot of power, and so you can see that the strong men are trying to hold his wheel and to be in position. Now, this is one of these sections where there is a stoplight in the middle of what used to be a sweet segment. And when I say segment, a sweet Strava segment, which at one point I actually had a KOM because I happened to be going down this with a 40-mile-an-hour tailwind one day, and so that was kind of sweet to get a KOM. But that segment has been removed due to the adage of stop signage. In any case, we look and we see everybody strung out here. One of the riders has had enough and he's sagging back. Hopefully he will not go back too far, being a strong man. So here we have riders. It might have been ideal to single up because of the speed. The rider in front of me could be wanting to go, or maybe should be trying to soak some more shelter, but this is okay. Like I said, there's a stop sign up here, and the chances are that we could get stopped, but we don't. And so now it is strong men to the front, and it is game on. And this is very typical of the Friday and or Tuesday rides. So now I will title this Battle of the Big Men. Now I know who's going to win this battle. I mean, we have the two legends up front, two legends that have actually won the sprint zone on Tuesdays, soloing away, and we get to see what they can do head to head. But with my sageness, I know that the big engine on the right, and that would be the legend, Matthew Michaels, he is the man at this point. And if you want to try to go head to head with him, you are full of hubris, or you just want to go to workout and try to help out the group. But at this point, look, we're doing 27 miles an hour, putting out good wattage, and we're still 2 by 2. And the wheel suckers are enjoying their shelter. So now I go to the front, and now it's a chance to see, okay, head to head up here, what kind of wattage am I throwing down? And you can see like that high 200s, 300s, and you see people kind of like, they kind of sag back a little bit. They don't want to be too close to the front. And even though when there's a chance, and that's the mark of a good wheel sucker and or a racer, because that's what you want to do. But since this isn't a race, you might as well come up and take some shelter. Now there's Carrie, aka Hollywood, just love those glasses. He's taking some good shelter behind me, knowing that, like, being closer to the front, if there is a go time, he wants to be there and not way, way, way back behind people that he knows is going to open up a gap. In this case, I am just burning matches like left and right here. There's a little bit of a headwind, and here's I'll call it attack. Now, we chatted later, and that particular rider was like, oh, you guys could have rotated and went a whole lot faster. At that point, at the speed that he came by, there was no way I was going to be able to get on the wheel. So I figured I kind of just sag back here, let everybody pass me. I think about maybe I might want to jump in, but I'm kind of gassed. And at the speed those guys accelerated, and since it's not a race, I just didn't feel that I needed to be up there with any kind of like competitive group. But that particular rider, and we'll just say his name's Dean, we always know he's going to go hard. He's going to push 500 watts for about 30 seconds and then he's going to die. Um, and as such, you can see the group up front. Yep, they have slowed down because no one's going to be able to hold that speed. I mean, of the people that were up there, Matthew Michaels was doing the lion's share of the work before, so he's not going to take over. So here we are in the second selection. And we're with a pretty strong group. Legendary Andy Lockwood, who came out as a new rider last year. Eric Lamar, like super strong. We got one of my new teammates wearing his own, team kit, Carlos, and of course Carrie, aka Hollywood, back here. But we're content to do what we're doing. And now this is when a gap opens up in front of Andy, the rider in the black. This is where it would have been wise to like try to sag back, but that didn't happen. And this is when Eric, who's a smaller rider, can throw out a ton of wattage. And you see the gap opened up right there. And by the time I realized it, it was too late. So Kerry and I go and we try to bring these guys back. But I know how strong Eric is. And maybe if I hadn't done a lot of work, I would have been able to maybe close this a little bit better. So Kerry comes over. No one's following behind me. You can see the lack of organization here. I didn't realize that Kerry had was off my wheel. At some point I do, and I realize that it's futile. Looking at my wattage, 200, 300 watts, I am not going to be able to close the gap on those guys because they're also accelerating. So I just take it easy. So Carlos clearly has a lot of strength. He catches me and goes by. He could be helping me pull, but he goes by too fast, and such. That effort is pretty much wasted. I guess it's kind of unfortunate because we could have used him to help reel those guys back in a group effort. But that's what happens when it's uncoordinated. And even for myself, I did not realize that Kerry was not on my wheel. In any case, this is pretty much how the group ride has gone. Like 19 miles an hour, 150 watts, just kind of taking it easy here. Figure the group is going to get back together. And this is typically, at least it used to be, this road used to be at some point the end of a sprint zone for maybe TTH, or there used to be a sign up here that was also used, which might have been, the speed limit sign. It's because we haven't actually declared this a sprint zone. I really don't know what people were actually sprinting for, except they were going hard, and I have no idea who took that one. But I knew who the strongmen were that did most of the work, and that's where the credit should go, regardless of, which wheel sucker was able to ride coattails all the way around and sprint over the top at the end. Looking back, there's some riders that have made their way up, and we are collecting the Lantern Rouges, so to speak, in this ride. So it's only a 20-mile-an-hour speed zone here. So, and we're not actually like concerned about catching the group in front of us. Not sure what everybody else is thinking, but at this point, we're kind of relaxed. My wattage is low. Everybody got whatever they wanted to put into it. Kind of unfortunate that I didn't make the selection on that one, but it wasn't a race, and tactically, if I were racing, I would not have spent any time up at the front in a two-up situation without ensuring that there was going to be more help and more rotation up there. Viewing the lovely town of Tinmouth here, very small. It's the new up-and-coming place where people are moving to because you can get, or at least you could get a much bigger house, much better value than from living in Fort Collins proper. But you can see the riders. They look like they were pretty much gassed. And there's the railroad tracks. We used to have to stop there, but now because of the new law, we can kind of roll it. There was a time when our group had been stopped by the local constabulary and held for a bunch of minutes while she, the officer involved, did her best imitation of walking tall, of like, what we see here is a failure to communicate and all that stuff. Um, but life is good. Everyone here pretty much on the correct side of the white line, enjoying the end of the ride. Looks like Carlos, yep, you can see some of the expressions there that he worked pretty hard. Um, yeah, this last section is it's pretty hard. So here we come to the major highway. The old route we used to just go straight here, but because the bridge is out, we are forced, well, we're not forced, but we could do an extra 10 miles to go around all this, or make the right hand turn here and be next to the highway. Good news is here that there's a nice shoulder and bike lane next to this major highway, and most of the cars understand that and they're pretty courteous. Still makes me a little bit nervous because of the speed that some of these people come by at. I'll digress a little bit. At least in Fort Collins, there's a trend for people to speed because they know they're not going to get caught doing it. So on roads that are near my house that are a 40-mile-an-hour, nice bike lane, if you're going 40 miles an hour, you're getting passed by 10 miles an hour. There are many, many, many cars doing at least 45, and the majority of them doing like 50. So I always do the speed limit 40, and I can see people getting annoyed behind me. I'm like, I'm doing the speed limit, people. But anyhow, the reason I mention that is because this is also a major road where people they just go as fast as they can because, in my opinion, or my observation, I should say, officers do not enforce the speed limit. Back to some of my earlier comments, like folks riding right next to the white line on a major highway, it just makes me nervous. I'm certain the cars also view it that way. I know I said that earlier in the video, but for those who just like jump to the end, you get to hear it again. Nicely grouped in the bike lane here. Everybody obeying the laws. And I guess this section of the road has a few stoplights close together, which is good for us cyclists because you don't get a lot of like 60, 70 mile an hour people coming by, even though the speed limit here I believe is only 45. Because if there weren't these stoplights, trust me, with a 2-lane highway, people just try to fly by. And I'm thinking one of these days, I do have one of those fancy radars on my bike. At some point I will download the information or set it up such that I can track how many cars passed us, what the maximum speed was, and all that stuff, and I may present that in a future video. Another stop sign. Yep, this is one of the ones where I mentioned is probably a good thing for cyclists. Keeps the speed down. Everyone's in a jocular mood here. I love that pink jersey that Matthew's got. That you could probably see from the ISS, International Space Station. It is so bright. Definitely good for visibility here. Also the red kit from Rio. Love that kit. Nice and bright. So as you can see that the Tuesday ride, it's fairly relaxed for the most part. It's not an easy ride by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a no-drop ride, which is what keeps people together, unlike some of the other rides in Fort Collins. A little bit of nervousness here. Even I'm riding a little closer to the line than I typically like, or at least the film makes it look that way. But because of the slow traffic, it's not so bad. This is one of these intersections coming up that makes me a little bit nervous. Some of the behaviors from some cyclists I don't like. In this case, there's like no traffic, so we can easily just cross here. But I've seen like a lot of cars don't really know that this lane extends for like a long period of time, and they'll stop there. Some riders go in front of the cars. I prefer to go behind if there's one car sitting there. No need to go in front. It just seems to be common sense. I don't think a lot of people are actually thinking about how other people actually view them and what their safest options are. Here's a good view of some of the speed here. Cars passing us. So we're probably doing what looks like 28 miles an hour. So they're passing us at a decent clip. Not sure if we have a tailwind here or not. Don't think we do. But people are kind of pushing it. The end of the ride is, of course, nigh. Riders are heading off. There's some that getting more training there. Enjoying some of the shelter. And you can see how nice the bike lanes are here in Fort Collins. Like coming from New Jersey, where there were almost no bike lanes when I left back in 2002, coming out here, I thought I had passed on and was in heaven. The streets were all clean, wide bike lanes. I'd gotten so used to riding out in New Jersey with like no shoulder that this was, you know, something that probably decreased my stress levels a lot more than I actually realized. People hitting it hard, 3 or 4 abreast up there. Like there we go, crossing the white line. See, I don't know if I think that's necessary. We got plenty of shoulder. I know we can use all of it, but just from a safety point of view, it's a good thing that there aren't a lot of cars coming. I know if I was a car, I'd be thinking, why aren't these guys over further? Don't they value their lives, or who knows? It'd be very interesting to show this video to maybe a motorist. Of course, they'd probably be complaining about the entire thing, but it'd be interesting to see what their take of it is, or perhaps other cyclists that are more enlightened or more empathetic, that just don't have the entitlement mentality. But here we can see that that little hill does in fact take its toll on people. But everyone's smiling. Yeah, you can see that there was work being done here today. I think it was supposed to be a rest day for me or a recovery day. I keep ignoring my Garmin. I probably shouldn't. But it's such a fun ride. And since technically I'm leading it, I just can't really miss it. But I could just hide and not do that much work. So there we go. And I think a good time was had by all. And hopefully everyone got a good flavor of what the Tuesday and Friday rides are all about. Peace out, everybody. Until next time, and hopefully the next video will be a sprint zone.